Although the Rifter has been through some 200 hardware reviews in its lifetime to keep it at the forefront of frigate technology, the fundamentals of its design have remained the same since Matari engineers first drew down its iconic silhouette, a perfect balance of offense, speed and agility that is unmatched by any other standard frigate in the cluster. Typically employed by the Republic military to engage in guerrilla warfare with the Imperial Armed Forces, and revered by most Matari paramilitary organisations as a vessel that excels in rapid ingress hit-and-run engagements, the Rifter is widely used outside the Republic military by private contractors and corporate defence forces across the Republic. In the private sector, the Rifter is often one of the first frigates that an independent Matari capsuleer will aspire to fly. It's cheap to acquire and available in abundance from every vessel dealer worth visiting. Graduating into a Rifter is almost seen as a rite of passage for most Matari pilots. Ahoy there folks, I'm Captain Benzie, and frankly it astonishes me that I've not covered the Rifter yet properly on this channel. This is absolutely one of the most iconic vessels in EVE Online, if not the most iconic vessel. It's on the fitting icon for crying out loud, and it is absolutely one of my favourite hulls in the entire cluster. It is a beautiful hull, it's a potent hull, but is it any good for Abyssal Deadspaces? That was the question I wanted to ask, and for you, happy viewer, I finally have the answer. Yes, but sort of. Now if you do enjoy this video or find it useful, let me know by hitting a like on it, sub to the channel if you haven't already, that would be really awesome, and if you do want to go the extra mile to help me keep making content like this, you can do so by joining the folks over on my Patreon. I have a PayPal tip jar and a Redbubble merchandise store if you want to grab yourself some exclusive swag. Anyway, with all that said and done then, let's jump right into this one because there's a fair amount to cover. When I first started recording this video, I had one goal in mind. For players who had just started off as a Minmatar pilot and had access to a Rifter, could you use it to jump straight into Tier 0 Abyssal Deadspaces? And ultimately, no, not really. I tried a lot of different fits, a lot of different Abyssal Deadspaces. I lost a lot of Rifters over the space of a few hours, and ultimately came to the conclusion that there is a fit that will sort of work, and will take you through Tier 0 Gammas, for example, but it's not very good. And ultimately I would honestly suggest just going for literally anything else. For the same cost, you can get significantly more reliable results. It's not to say that it can't do it, it was just way too much effort. It involved me overheating frequently. I had to manually pilot in order to be able to hit anything and to cope with the incoming damage and to deal enough DPS. I lost several Rifters to Abyssal Deadspaces where I just got stuck up against something like a Vedmak and just could not kill it in the 20 minutes time limit that I had in order to get through that. So ultimately, if you are just starting out as a Rifter pilot and you're wanting to know can you jump into an Abyssal Deadspace, the answer in short is no, not really. Do not try it, it is just going to get you killed and lose your ship. If you want to be flying a Rifter in Abyssal Deadspaces, you can do it, but you're going to need to gear up a little bit first. After a lot of trial and error, this was finally the fit that I decided to settle on. I jumped out into space, activated what I thought was a tranquil firestorm, jumped in only to realise I'd accidentally used calm filaments instead, and promptly lost the ship in less than 30 seconds to a Vedmak and a Kikimora. Not a great start really, but we came back, I rebuilt the ship, and I jumped out again and again and again, and yes, this is the fit. This can do firestorms, this can do electricals, it can do darks, it can do any of the 5 Abyssal Deadspaces as long as they are tranquil. And curiously enough, my recommendations for this is actually going to be either Gamma, because we can exploit that explosive resistance hull, or Dark. Yeah, I know, it's a little bit controversial to say using a turret ship, especially a short-range turret ship, in a dark Abyssal Deadspace, but the Rifter makes that work, and it actually gets some pretty good clear times. You're looking about anywhere between 5 and 7 minutes per run if you're not going particularly quickly. I think the fastest run I did was about 4 minutes in total. There's pretty good ISK in running Abyssal Deadspaces that quickly, that frequently. You get a good amount of ISK per hour. And ultimately this fit is a little bit over 7 million ISK. It's really cheap to get into. The problem is you need to have your gunnery skills right right up to make this work. You must be able to fit the tier 2 modules onto this. Otherwise, it pretty much just falls apart. It's really weird. Like, if I go down, even with my skills, if I go down from Tech 2 modules down to the Tech 1 modules, it just doesn't work. It's like the Tech 2 modules just push it over the barrier and into workable. But hey, let's have a look at the actual fit. So for the high slots, 200mm AutoCannon IIs fit with Hail S. Using Hail, we get excellent DPS. Most of this is an explosive with a little bit of kinetic, which is why I recommend running this through Gamma Abyssal Deadspaces to exploit the fact that they're going to have a explosive resistance hull. Now, admittedly, so are you, but it doesn't actually make that much of a difference. For the mid slots, I've gone for a 1 meganewton monopropellant enduring afterburner. We want to basically keep this running at all times. You might want to turn it off every now and then if you're finding that your tracking isn't quite keeping up, but for the most part, with this particular fit, I found that this is no problem at all. We then have a X5 enduring Stasis Webifier. This is to hold an enemy in position. There are some enemies that do like to try and kite you, so being able to web them holds them in position and keeps them at range. Also keeps them nice and slow for your turrets to track that little bit better. Finally, for the mid slots, a small cap battery 2. Now this, admittedly, you can go down to a small cap battery 1 or even the enduring middle compact one, the lead acid, I will remember the name in a moment, and that will make you cap stable, but single newts can then push you into cap instability, which is worth noting. This is an armor tank drifter. As such, I've gone for a small armor repairer 2. You can almost get away with a enduring armor repairer 1. I found, honestly, though, that I was having to overheat that entirely too frequently to keep up sometimes, so therefore you're kind of going to have to use a lot of nanite paste to keep up with that, which again just doesn't seem worth it. Get your hull upgrades trained so you can use a small armor repairer 2 into that slot quickly. A damage control 2 as well helps push up our resistances. Higher resistances means a reduction in the damage taken. All around a good thing to have. Final 2 low slots then are a tracking enhancer and a Gyrostabilizer, both Tech 2 versions of these. Again, the Gyrostabilizer you can probably get away with just going for a standard Gyrostabilizer because it's just DPS, right? But the Tracking Enhancer 2 really does need to be a Tracking Enhancer 2. If you go for any of the lower ones, again, you just seem to miss entirely too frequently, or at least I was. I don't know if it's just my bad luck or what, but by putting a Tracking Enhancer 2 on, suddenly it completely came together. For the rigs then, finally, small projectile burst aerator for more DPS, small nanobot accelerator, and small auxiliary nanopump just to get that little bit of extra armor tanking going on there and help the ship be that little bit more survivable. So, with that said and done, let's jump in and showcase this one in action. I'll be honest, it's almost disgusting to me how many rifters I had to sacrifice to figure this one out. Like, normally I have a couple of rough runs. This was, yeah, it was bad. But anyway, let's jump into a tranquil gamma filament, and I've double checked that it's a tranquil at this time. If you've looked at the stats there of the particular autocannons I'm using, you can see a good orbit to kind of aim for is around about the 5 kilometer mark. That's kind of what I've now set my default orbit to, and it does seem to work on pretty much everything here. So the first room of this gamma dead space we have is an Ephialtes Lancer. We want to close the distance quickly and start our orbiting tightly. Now, that's not going to be a problem for us because that's exactly what we want to do with everything in here, but this can be quite a fast little ship and can really mess with your orbits if you're not careful, so it is worth, again, just making sure that we've got that Webifier on things just to stop it running away as quickly. Boom, we're into range. You can see very little damage to our shields on approach because with the Afterburner alone, that's pretty much enough to get in. Some people will say, well, why don't you use a micro warp drive? Because I really don't need it. I want to be using this as something that I can speed tank whilst orbiting. I don't necessarily need it in order to close the distance. As long as you know how to spiral or manually orbit and, you know, work yourself out with double clicking in space so that you can do all kinds of stuff like that, ultimately you don't need to worry about a micro warp drive for the most part unless you're going for a kiting fit. For a brawler, I find that the Afterburner, more than enough. And you can see that hail ammunition as well is just chewing through that Lancer, because again we've got a resistance hole to the explosive damage, and that hail is doing primarily explosive damage. You can see, even though we're not really quite as close as we'd like to be, it doesn't take long for that to go down. The Lancer is gone, the gate is open, we're now going to lock onto the biocomparative cache, approach that, beautiful explosion in the background there, and start to loot that cache. Now, I normally start shooting around about 18 kilometers away because that's when I theoretically can start hitting. You can wait until you're a little bit closer and then start shooting in order just to maximize and, you know, minimize the amount of ammo wastage. But there we go, biocomparative cache done. Going to approach, doing my usual click, 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 where it would say loot all, so that I grab it the second I go past. Spam the click button, there we go through, and off to the gate. Nice and quick, first room, no troubles at all. Ephialtes Lancer, not too much of a problem ship anyway, just as long as you know that you need to get in nice and tight. It's worth remembering as well, you should theoretically be reloading your ammunition between rooms. Even if you're not sure that what you're going to go up against is going to use the same ammunition, in this case I've only got one type of ammunition anyway, but if you were swapping ammunition anyway, it's still better to go in with a full thing in case you don't need to swap. Okay, we've got 2 Strike Needle Tessellers. Okay. These can be quite fast. They can also do a surprising amount of damage if you're not careful. We do want to kill these off nice and quickly. This time I'm orbiting the biocomparative cache rather than the ships themselves, so they get a little bit of angular going past them so they don't do as much, and then I can start shooting with the guns. Once I get a little bit closer, then I can change my orbit now to orbit the Tessellers, start the web on them to slow them down, and you'll see again that hail just chews through them really quickly. On to the next one, start shooting, couple of glancing shots there for a moment, and then this will suddenly start to just munch straight through the rest of it. There we go, armor and hull will go down pretty much in one, no problem at all. It's worth noting that if you go up against the Charybdis on this, again, as long as you just spiral inwards, no problems. You just kind of don't approach it in a straight line. Come at it from an angle and then sort of, maybe try and orbit at, say, 30 kilometers, and then once you're approaching the 30-kilometer orbit, shrink your orbit to 20 kilometers, then 10, then 5, into whatever it is you actually want it to be. In this case, 5 kilometers is pretty much what we need it to be. Awesome, nice and easy. Same with the Vedmak. Get nice and close to it, orbit it using a 500-meter orbit, and the damn thing will just never hit you. You don't have to worry about it at all. Here we are now coming into room number 3 with an armor tank drifter that hasn't even lost its shields because the tracking and the damage that we're doing is good enough to just wreck everything, pretty much. Striking Damavik, these can be quite nasty as well because any Triglavian ship, essentially it spools up and deals increased damage each cycle after. Even if it misses you, the next cycle is going to do more damage, so you need to kill these fairly quickly. They are very fast-moving targets, but surprisingly large, so you can hit them quite easy. Again, we're just going to web it. Pretty much we're just going to fly past it, but I've set an orbit on it just to slow things down a little bit. And again, we're wrecking through its armor nice and quickly, nice and easily here. Down it goes. I do love the Vedmak. It's actually a surprisingly fun... Damavik, sorry. Why am I saying Vedmak now? The Damavik. It's a surprisingly fun frigate to fly. I don't recommend it for Abyssal Deadspaces because it is just too expensive and other ships can do the same thing. Significantly cheaper, but it's a really cool ship. It looks awesome. Its weaponry is really cool, and they can be surprisingly powerful in PvP. Anyway, there we go. That is the Damavik down. Kill the biocomparative cache again. We approach that. We've barely lost any shields at all because that damage control 2 is doing its thing, and off we go. Now, the cool thing about this fit as well is that this does actually work for L1 agent missions, and I even ran the entire SOE Epic arc on my alt using this fit. This is very similar to this at least. It was slightly different in the low slots. I didn't have the damage control, I was using plates, but there we go, which is what inspired the previous version of the Abyssal Deadspace fit. Ran the SOE arc, no trouble at all. I did need to upgrade to the tier 2 ammunition and tier 2 damage and that for going up against the last boss of it all, but other than that, dead easy. And there we go. That is running a Rifter through an Abyssal Deadspace in this case, 6 minutes. 6 minutes from start to finish there, decent amount of ISK. You will pay for this ship back in 2 Abyssals, maybe 3, if you really, like, you know, if you really scrape out on the loot. But if you get decent loot in your runs, this ship pays itself back in 2 Abyssal Deadspaces, and you can skill into it in the first day of playing the game if you are using someone's referral code. Hint hint, mine's in the description down below. Click that link, log into your account on the EVE website, bam, 1 million free skill points for you. Anyway folks, please let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below on this one. I'd be looking to cover more of the Rifter in future, so hope this helps you, happy sailing, and see you in New Eden!